Detective allows a detailed examination of what is happening internally within the flight simulator. This is useful because it allows you to easily spot what events and variables, or commands and data refs in X-Plane, to use when configuring your virtual hardware. It is also used to create bespoke events that allow interfacing to complex aircraft that do not use standard flight sim events and variables, or commands and data refs in X-Plane. Detective can be started from the Flight Sim IO server, under the Services tab. It can also be started in the Virtual Hardware Builder by clicking this toolbar button. When Detective first starts, and an aircraft is loaded within the flight simulator, an auto data noise process begins. In many complex aircraft, lots of events and variables get updated very often, and this distracts from clearly seeing what is happening in the flight simulator when you operate controls in the aircraft. This process can take a couple of minutes on very complex aircraft, so we will skip to the end. Once this process has finished, any events and variables that fired or changed whilst we waited will appear in the detected view on the Events and Variables tabs. They will also have been automatically hidden, which means they will no longer appear on the monitoring view on the left-hand side. Both SimConnect and local, or more often referred to as LVAR variables, will be detected and hidden. Local variables are variables used internally within the aircraft, and accessing these often allows interfacing complex aircraft, when standard flight simulator events or variables would not work. We will create a bespoke event to access local variables, to enable the interfacing of a non-standard autopilot heading button. First, we need to identify what happens when the autopilot heading button is pushed in the flight simulator. To do this, we need to enable variable monitoring. Now any variable that changes, which is not in the hidden list, will show up in our monitoring view. We can now push the autopilot heading button in the flight simulator to see what variables change. We have quite a few local variables change their values. Most are clearly to do with sound, but the heading and heading button variables are the obvious ones that will help us. We will try setting the heading button variable first, to see if this causes all the other local variable changes. We need to search for the variable in the local variable list. Once we have found it, we need to click on it. Next, we need to create a bespoke event. A bespoke event operates in the same way as a flight simulator event, or a command in X-Plane, and can be assigned to virtual hardware in the usual way. However, a bespoke event is something we create. A bespoke event consists of a number of tasks that perform specific functions. To create a bespoke event, we need to click the Add Bespoke Event button, and give the bespoke event a meaningful name. Because we have a local variable selected, the task buttons that can be used with this variable are enabled. In the monitoring view, we saw the heading button get set to 1, so we will use the set task to do the same in our bespoke event. Clicking the Set Task button prompts us for the value we want to set on the selected variable. We now have our first task in our bespoke event. We can test if this will work correctly by clicking the Test Bespoke Event button. Looking at the monitoring view, we can see the heading button variable has changed to 1. Unfortunately, it has not gone back to 0 or changed the heading variable from 1 and then to 0. Looking in the virtual cockpit, the autopilot heading push button is pressed in, and has not popped back to its unpressed state. So, the autopilot heading button needs to be clicked in the virtual cockpit to make it unpressed. With that done, we are going to have to add some more set tasks to carry out all the required local variable changes. We will set the heading local variable to 1, and the heading button local variable to 0. We can now test again. We can see the heading variable got set to 1, and then the aircraft set it back to 0 because the aircraft is not in the correct state for that function to operate. However, the heading button variable change is nowhere to be seen. This has happened because the variable change happened so fast. In fact, it was so fast, the heading button in the virtual cockpit didn't show any change. Local variables are sampled for changes every 33 milliseconds by default. If a local variable changes in between samples, the change can be missed. The sample rate can be increased by moving the slider at the bottom of the monitoring window to the left, where lower values mean less chance of missed variable changes. We want to see the autopilot heading button move in the virtual cockpit, so we will add a sleep task to delay the heading button change back to 0. We can now test again, but we will clear the monitoring view first to remove the clutter. It is clearly shown that we now have a bespoke event that does exactly the same as pressing the autopilot heading button in the virtual cockpit. If we now go to the virtual hardware builder, we can assign our newly created bespoke event to a push button on a device panel, just like any standard flight simulator event or command in X-Plane. This concludes our tutorial. I hope you found it useful.